July 9, 1945, Hell's Kitchen, New York City. A warm summer afternoon, in the last months of the war. Two little boys pedal their bikes down a Manhattan sidewalk. Brothers. The older one is 6, the younger one is 3, just 2 days shy of his 4th birthday. His name is Jerry. A woman comes toward them on the street, friendly, smiling. She offers the boys candy. The little one's whole face lights up. Of course it does. He's 3. So Jerry climbs off his bike and goes with the nice lady to get the candy. His big brother Tom stays behind, holding the bikes, waiting. He waits, and Jerry never comes back. Here is what nobody standing on that street corner could possibly know. It will take 74 years to learn what happened to Jerry. His parents will pass away without ever finding out. The police of 1945 will run out of leads within weeks. And his big brother, the boy left holding the bikes, will spend the rest of his life, all the way into his 80s, still searching for the little brother who went to get candy and never returned. And when the answer finally comes, it won't come from a detective. It won't come from a witness. It will come from a tube of spit and 2 sisters on the other side of the country who have no idea they're about to shatter everything they believe about their own family. This is the story of the boy who vanished for a piece of candy, and the DNA test that solved it, 3/4 of a century later. To understand what was lost, you have to picture the world it was lost in. Hell's Kitchen, on the west side of Manhattan. A tough, crowded, working-class neighborhood, packed with families getting by, while a world war grinds toward its end. Kids run these streets in packs. They play stickball. They ride their bikes for hours. Nobody's watching the clock, because in 1945, this is simply what childhood looks like. Free and unsupervised, and assumed to be safe. Jerry Martin is the baby of his family. Not quite 4. Tom is his big brother, 6 years old, and on that July afternoon, the two of them are doing what they always do, out on their bikes, together. That's the last ordinary moment. A big brother and a little brother, side by side, on a summer day. And then the woman appears, and she offers candy. And a 3-year-old does exactly what a 3-year-old does. He follows the promise of something sweet. Tom is 6. He doesn't chase after them. Why would he? A nice lady, some candy. His little brother will be right back. So he holds the bikes and he waits on the corner, the way you'd wait for anyone you love to come back from a quick errand. Except this errand has no end. Minutes pass. The woman doesn't return. Jerry doesn't return. And slowly, a 6-year-old boy on a New York street corner begins to understand that something has gone very, very wrong, and that he was the last person in his family to see his little brother alive. That moment will define the rest of Tom's life, because he was there. He watched Jerry walk away. And for the next 7 decades, that image, his baby brother, following a stranger for candy, will never once let him go. By nightfall, the Martin family is living every parent's most primal nightmare. Their little boy is simply gone. No note, no demand, no witness beyond a terrified 6-year-old and his description of a smiling woman with candy. In 1945, there are no security cameras, no cell phones, no missing child alert systems. There is a frantic neighborhood search, a police report, and a story in the New York Daily News. And then, almost unbearably fast, the trail goes cold. Think about how a case like this dies in 1945. The police canvass. They chase what few leads exist. But a stranger who walks off with a small child, on foot, into a city of millions, with no camera, no forensic science, no database, is a stranger who is almost impossible to catch. Within weeks, the active investigation grinds to a halt. And you have to remember what year this is. In 1945, a missing child is a local tragedy, not a national emergency. There is no coordinated system to move a photo across the country. There is no way to track a stranger who leaves no physical trace. If the woman with the candy put Jerry on a bus, or a train, or simply walked him a few neighborhoods away and started calling him something else, there is quite literally no mechanism on Earth, in 1945, that could ever find him. The tools that would one day crack this case wouldn't exist for another 70 years. But a family's grief does not grind to a halt. It just goes quiet. Jerry's parents spend the rest of their lives with a hole in the middle of their family, a missing chair, a birthday that comes every July with no one to celebrate. The specific, unending torture of not knowing, is he alive? Is he suffering? Is he out there somewhere, grown up, with no memory of who he really is? They never get an answer. Jerry's mother and father both pass away without ever learning what happened to their son. They go their entire lives believing they failed him, and never once getting to know the truth. And that leaves one person still carrying the question, one person who was there on that corner, one person who cannot, and will not, let it go. Tom, the big brother who held the bikes. Here is the detail that turns this from a sad old case into something that will break your heart. Tom Martin never stops looking for Jerry. Not for a year, not for a decade, for his entire life. He grows up. He grows old. The world changes completely around him. The war ends. The decades roll by. The neighborhood transforms. Everyone who remembered 1945 slowly disappears. Vain through all of it, Tom carries the same question he's carried since he was 6 years old, standing on a corner with 2 bikes. What happened to my little brother? You have to sit with the weight of that. Most of us, if we lost someone at 6, would have only the faintest memory of them by the time we were 80. But Tom's memory never faded, because his guilt never faded. He was the one who was there. He was the one who didn't follow. In his mind, unfairly, but permanently, he was the one who let Jerry walk away. And that is the quiet engine of an entire life. Think of everything Tom lived through in the decades that followed. Growing up, building a life, raising his own family, growing old. And underneath all of it, always, the same 6-year-old standing on the same corner, wondering if today is the day he'll find out. Most cold cases fade because the people who cared move on, or pass on. This one never faded, because the person who cared most was a little boy who blamed himself, trapped inside an aging man who refused to let his brother become just a name on an old police report. So he searches, for decades, and he gets nothing. No trace, no lead. The case is one of the oldest cold cases in New York City. So old that the detectives who first worked it are long gone. So old that it predates nearly every tool we now use to solve these things. By 2019, Tom is a 79-year-old retiree, living out his later years in Florida. Most men his age have made their peace with the unanswered questions of their lives. Tom hasn't. So he does one last thing. A long shot. Probably pointless. He spits into a tube, and he mails his DNA off to a consumer ancestry company. Not really to find his ancestry, but for one specific, desperate, decades-old reason. He is still, at 79 years old, trying to find his baby brother. He has no idea that it's about to work. Now the story jumps, across the country, and into a completely different family that has never heard the name Jerry Martin. Meet 2 sisters, Cynthia and Audrey. They have no connection to a missing boy from 1945. They have no idea their family is hiding anything at all. They're just curious about their heritage. The ordinary reason millions of people spit into a tube every year. Their family name is Palmadesso. Then their identity, their whole lives, has been built around one simple fact. They are Italian. Italian and Irish. It's who they are. It's the food, the stories, the last name itself. Audrey goes first. She takes the DNA test mostly out of curiosity about her own children. And when her results come back, something is wrong. There is no Italian ancestry. None. The report shows Irish, Scottish, and Spanish, but not a trace of the Italian heritage that has defined her entire family for as long as anyone can remember. At first, it's just baffling. A glitch maybe. An error in the test. Because how do you grow up Italian, in an Italian family, with an Italian last name, and share none of the DNA? Then her sister Cynthia takes the test too. Same result. No Italian ancestry. 2 sisters. Same impossible answer. And now, it isn't a glitch anymore. It's a crack in the foundation of who they thought they were. And through that crack, another name is about to appear. A stranger's name, sitting in Cynthia's list of DNA matches. A 79-year-old man none of them has ever heard of. A man named Tom. When Cynthia opens her list of DNA relatives, there's a match she can't explain. A man in his late 70s. Living in Florida. A complete stranger. And the site is telling her that this stranger is close family. Close enough that it predicts Cynthia and her sister are this man's nieces. Nieces. Which would mean this stranger is their father's brother. But their father, Richard Palmadesso, didn't have a brother named Tom. Their father was a Palmadesso, born to Isabel and Angelo Palmadesso, an Italian family from Staten Island. So how is a strange man in Florida turning up as their uncle? So the sisters do the one thing that finally breaks the whole case open. They test their DNA against their known Palmadesso cousins, the people they've called family their entire lives. And the result stops them cold. They share no DNA with the Palmadessos. None. Read that again. The people they grew up with as blood relatives, the cousins, the family they thought their father came from, are not related to them at all. But a total stranger named Tom is. There is only one explanation that fits. Their father, Richard Palmadesso, was not born a Palmadesso, and that lands like a physical blow, because it doesn't just rewrite a name on a family tree, it rewrites them. If their father wasn't really a Palmadesso, then the Italian heritage they'd built their whole identity around was never theirs. The family stories, the cousins, the last name they carried their entire lives, all of it belonged to someone else's history, not their own. In a single afternoon of DNA results, two sisters discover that the foundation of who they are was quietly, completely wrong. But the shock quickly turns into something bigger than their own identity. Because that stranger, Tom has spent his whole life searching for a little brother named Jerry, a boy who vanished off a Manhattan street in 1945, chasing a piece of candy. The sisters look at the timeline, they look at their father, and a question forms that is almost too enormous to say out loud. Could their dad, the man they knew all their lives as Richard Palmadesso, actually be Jerry Martin, the missing boy, the one Tom never stopped looking for? To find out, they have to dig into the life of their own father, and everything they find makes it stranger. So who, exactly, was Richard Palmadesso? On paper, the answer is simple. According to his birth certificate, Richard Rocco Palmadesso was born on Staten Island on May 31, 1943, to Isabel and Angelo Palmadesso. But when the sisters actually look at that paper, and at the family around it, nothing about it holds together. Start with the parents. Isabel and Angelo never had any children of their own together. Not one, before or after Richard. Isabel was already in her 40s. She had two grown daughters from an earlier relationship, but with Angelo, she supposedly had exactly one child, this one boy, and then never another. Now put that beside the timeline of the kidnapping, and this is where it becomes almost impossible to look away. Jerry Martin was taken in July of 1945, and Angelo Palmadesso, the man listed as Richard's father, had been away for roughly 2 years, serving in World War II. He didn't arrive home to Staten Island until September of 1945, 2 months after Jerry vanished. And there's more that doesn't sit right the deeper the sisters dig. Their father barely spoke about his childhood. When his adoptive mother passed away, he was sent off to an uncle, and once he grew up and moved out, he drifted away from the Palmadesso family almost entirely, kept in touch with almost no one. At the time, it might have looked like an ordinary family drifting apart. But now, with what the DNA is telling them, it reads differently. It reads like a man who never quite belonged to the family he was raised in, because biologically, he never did. So here is the picture the sisters are staring at. A woman in her 40s, no children of her own with her husband, a husband away at war, due home any month. And then, right in that window, right before he returns, a little boy appears in the family. A boy with a birth certificate that says he was born 2 years earlier, but who arrives in that household at exactly the moment a nearly 4-year-old went missing off a Manhattan street. The sisters can't prove the motive. No one can, but they can't stop wondering. Did a childless woman, desperate to give her returning husband a son, take a little boy who wasn't hers, and simply paper over him with a new name, a new birthday, a new life? There's the sardonic truth of it. On paper, Richard Palmadesso was born in 1943. But the paper was the lie. The little boy underneath it had been born in 1941 and named Jerry, and loved by a family that never stopped looking. And Richard, the man who lived that entire life, never knew any of it. So the sisters confirm it, the only way it can be confirmed, through the DNA itself. And the answer is undeniable. Richard Palmadesso was Jerry Martin, the missing boy, the one who followed a stranger for candy in 1945, the one his big brother searched for across an entire lifetime. He didn't vanish into nothing. He wasn't lost forever. He grew up, just miles from where he was taken, under a different name, a different birthday, a different family, a different history, an entire, complete life, built on top of an erased one. He went to school. He was raised, after his adoptive mother passed away when he was 12, by an uncle. He grew up, moved out, and drifted away from that family. He lived a whole ordinary American life, and never once knew that his real name was Jerry, that he'd been born in Hell's Kitchen, that a mother and father had spent their lives grieving him, or that a big brother was, at that very moment, still searching. He never knew, and here is the detail that turns this discovery from a triumph into a tragedy. Richard, Jerry, had passed away in 2017, 2 years before his own daughters uncovered the truth. He died believing he was Richard Palmadesso. He died 2 years too early to ever be told who he really was. He never got to hear his real name. He never got to learn that he'd been loved and searched for from the very beginning. And he never got to meet the big brother who had never given up on him. Think about the cruelty of that timing. 74 years of searching. And the answer arrives just 24 months after the one person it mattered most to is gone. And spare a thought, too, for the sisters. Because they didn't just solve a stranger's cold case. They solved their own father's. They learned after he was gone that the man who raised them had himself been a stolen child, that his whole life had been quietly built on a crime committed before he could even remember it. that he'd carried a secret his entire life without ever knowing he was carrying it. Every childhood memory they had of him now sits on top of a truth he never got to know about himself. That's its own particular kind of grief, to finally understand your father completely, only once it's too late to tell him. For Tom, it is the strangest possible ending. After a lifetime of not knowing, he finally has his answer. He finally knows what happened to the little brother he watched walk away. But he has the answer without the reunion. He learns where Jerry went, and how he lived, and that he was okay. And in the same breath, he learns that he missed him by 2 years. The brother he searched for across 7 decades was out there the whole time. Reachable, alive, and now, forever, just out of reach. And this is where the case does something rare. It gets solved, and it stays a mystery at the very same time. Because DNA answered the biggest question of all: what happened to Jerry Martin? It closed one of the oldest cold cases in New York history. It gave a family 3 generations deep the truth. But there are questions even a perfect DNA match cannot answer. And they are the ones that keep you up at night. Who was the woman with the candy? She was never identified in 1945, and she has never been identified since. She stepped out of a Manhattan afternoon, took a little boy, and vanished back into history without a name. How exactly did Jerry become Richard? Who created that birth certificate? Who decided he'd been born in 1943 instead of 1941? Did Isabel and Angelo Palmadesso know they were raising a stolen child, or were they too deceived? The sisters have a theory: a childless woman, a husband coming home from war, a desperate wish for a son. But a theory is not a confession, and everyone who could turn that theory into fact is gone. Isabel, Angelo, Jerry's parents, and Jerry himself, the one person who lived the whole story, passed away 2 years before anyone could ask him a single question. The people who knew the truth took it with them. So think back, one last time, to that summer afternoon in 1945. 2 brothers on their bikes, a woman with candy, a little boy following her around a corner, and a 6-year-old left holding the handlebars, waiting for a brother who wouldn't come back for 74 years. Tom held those bikes on that corner, and in a way, he never really stopped. He waited his whole life. And when the waiting finally ended, it didn't end with his little brother running back to him. It ended with a tube of spit, 2 sisters, and the bittersweet truth that Jerry had been alive, and safe, and living a full life the entire time, never knowing his own name. The candy that took Jerry Martin was never traced. The woman who offered it was never found. And the how and the who of one of New York's oldest mysteries, to this day, no one knows. Jerry Martin was found 74 years too late for a reunion. A stolen child who lived an entire life under a name that was never his, and passed away without ever knowing the truth. But he is not the only child ever raised as someone he wasn't, because decades before Jerry's case cracked open, another family got their missing little boy back, or so they believed. They raised him, they loved him, they fought in court to keep him. And then, nearly a lifetime later, a single DNA test revealed the impossible. The boy they'd raised for decades had never been their son at all, which meant their real child was still out there and had never been found. That story is on your screen right now. Tap it. You won't believe what the test revealed.